All right. The chapter 2 in pretty much any biology book is always going to be chemistry. So the first chapter is a survey chapter, which we've covered. Second chapter is chemistry. And people are like, well, why do we have to do chemistry? This is biology. And chemistry is definitely not my favorite subject. However, there was a process that we discussed in chapter 1 that I said applies to all living organisms. And I said they all have or undergo a series of chemical reactions. Do you recall what it is when you reference a series of chemical reactions? That might be catabolic and anabolic. Metabolism. Yes, metabolism. So when we start talking about metabolism, we start talking about breaking things down catabolically and then creating substances anabolically. And those are chemical reactions. And we need to know the basics of chemistry. And I'm going to reiterate that, the basics of chemistry. We're not going to take this super deep. Okay, we're going to do atoms, protons, neutrons, and electrons. We're going to keep it simple. All right, so that's what we'll cover today. That's why we're covering chemistry. So we are tying chemistry into life, biology, and the last part that we'll cover are the properties of water, because all living things have water. Okay, so here's kind of a rundown of what we will cover initially. We'll start off with matter, what matter is. We'll review the periodic table, and we'll discuss some key points on that. We'll talk about the elements that you will find in all living organisms, and then the difference between an atom, a molecule, and a compound. Then we're going to talk about the specific aspects of atoms, molecules, and compounds. And this part we'll pick up on next week. So we'll get through 1 through 4 today. Okay? Matter. What is matter? Anything that takes up space and has mass. And I remember that from when I was in elementary school. Like, that's what your science teacher had you memorize. Like, a hypothesis is an educated guess. Matter is anything that takes up space and has mass. Does matter have to be alive? No. This desk, these chairs, your books, those are all matter. Are you matter? Yeah, you are matter. Okay, so anything that takes up space and has mass. When we take matter and we begin to break it down, when we break it down into its smallest components, they're referred to as elements, which brings us into the periodic table of elements. Now, for biology, you will not have to memorize the periodic table. And any question that you have about the periodic table, or that the periodic table, the information on it could assist you or support you in your answer, you will have a periodic table provided for you to refer to. Okay? But I am going to teach you how to read it, how to pull the information from it. You may already know this, and that's fantastic. And if not, then this will help you a bunch, what we're about to discuss. So the periodic table is all of the elements, okay, both naturally occurring and artificial, meaning people are still creating elements, scientists are still creating elements, and that periodic table continues to grow. But basic organization, when you're reading the periodic table left to right, we call these rows, and I have a periodic table on the next slide, I just wanted to cover the terms. Rows go left to right. Those are considered periods. So periods within the periodic table. The columns, which go vertically up and down, are divided into groups or families. Groups or families. If it is designated as a group, it will always have, and I put this here, Roman numeral in front of it. Okay, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. But these are some key indicators or key notes to navigate the periodic table. So, here's an example of a periodic table. All right? We have all of the elements listed in order of their atomic number. Okay, and then of course we have a section that's cut out and down here. Going across from left to right. On the rows, these are called periods. So periods go from left to right, go across. When you look at it vertically, going up or down, up and down, these are divided into groups or families. If it is a group, it has a Roman numeral that precedes the letter A. So this is a group, this is a group. Is this a group? This is a family. Family, 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 family. Group. Group, 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 group. Okay? So that's what that is. Groups have Roman numerals, families don't, and they're going vertically. Those are the columns. The rows are periods when you reference them. Now, when we answer questions for our test, you won't be asked anything about any of these big, large elements. You will only need to be familiar with how to manipulate, and I'm going to say manipulate because we'll do basic calculations, elements 1 through 20. So that's hydrogen all the way to calcium. Just 1 through 20. And I'll go over today what you'll be expected to do. Very simple things, but we're not going to deal with anything super large. Okay? Questions right now? All right? So when we look at all of these elements that are required to carry out metabolic functions, we consider that in order to be alive, or considered alive, you have to be a bunch of elements that have come together to create molecules, compounds, organelles, which we will study next, and then a cell. These are 25, and this isn't even 25 listed, but there are 25 key elements that you will find in all living organisms. You are responsible for knowing these 4 and this group here. These 4 are found in the highest abundance in all living organisms: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Those 4. These make up about 4% of your composition. A question for the test would look something like, which of the following is a key element for a living organism? And you would need to be familiar with these 4 and these. You will not have to know the individual trace elements. Okay? So a total of 11 elements you'll need to be able to recognize. So 96% of living organisms, 96% of their element concentration for a living organism is composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Approximately 4% includes these elements. And then we have what we call trace elements. What does it mean to use the word trace? What is that referencing? Small amounts. Small amounts. We call these trace elements, which means that you'll find them in very small amounts. But you have to find them. Because if you don't have them, you will expire. You will expire. So the trace elements, you don't need to be familiar with them specifically, but generally speaking, a trace element is an element that we find in such a small concentration that people think it's not important. However, it is vital to biological function. And that's how we say, if you don't have it, you die. You expire. Okay? You need to be able to recognize by visually identifying those 11. Okay? So here is a diagram straight out of your textbook that compares different living and non-living aspects. Okay? When I look at seawater, living or non-living? It's non-living. Okay? If it were living, it would have what 4 elements in its highest abundance or highest concentration? Oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. Yes. The very top element in abundance in the ocean is oxygen, then hydrogen, then chlorine, then sodium, then carbon's not even up there. So that indicates to me, if I was just analyzing the element composition of whatever this is, it is not living. Speaking of not living, Let me explain this and then I'll explain what I'm thinking. Here I have this young lady who is swimming or getting beat over by this wave, but we did her element composition and breakdown. What elements are in the highest abundance? Carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen. Chon, that's literally what I used to remember that, Chon, because I'm a memorizer, C-H-O-N, Chon. Those are the 4 elements in highest concentration in living organisms. Let me speak on carbon real quick. Carbon is found in anything that's alive. Carbon is found in anything that's alive. So do you have carbon? Yes. Okay. Yes, you have carbon. Now, when you say something is organic, what does that mean? It can decompose. That is true. It has carbon. By definition, organic means it has carbon. Are you organic? Yes. Yes, you are. Is your dog organic? Yes. Are all the foods you eat organic? Unless you eat something that was once or never alive. Like if you eat clay pots, that's a thing, then that's not organic. But if you're eating something that came from something living, it is organic. Our society says we'll pay more for organic foods, but a cucumber is a cucumber, and all cucumbers are organic. The difference, there is a difference, and it's in the treatment that we give that organic food after we harvest it. So once we pick those cucumbers, do we spray them with synthetic pesticides, like stuff that's made in a lab with artificial chemicals? Or do we treat them with a pesticide that is organic or based on things that were living? So when you're paying $6 for your organic cucumber and the other one's 39 cents, truly they're both organic, right? The cucumber is organic. Now how it was treated afterwards is classified differently. So by definition, if it's organic, all that means is it's treated differently. And that's when we talk about foods. But what element does it have? Carbon. Organic means it has carbon. It contains carbon. Okay? So now you know that. And you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I spend a whole lot of money on organic foods. That's because you're rich. I just buy regular foods. And truly, I'm like, oh, 39-cent cucumber is organic. Just not as organic as yours. Anyway, so we have that breakdown. Now here we have different organisms, pumpkins. And when we analyze pumpkins, first of all, living or non-living? Yeah, they're living. They're a living organism. It's a pumpkin. Look at the elements that we find in the highest abundance. Oxygen, hydrogen, carbon. But then it says potassium before nitrogen. Now, that could be just a random fluke. That could be from that sample. Or it may be that that organism does have more potassium on a regular basis than nitrogen, which is okay. All right, so it's not always going to fall in, but it'll be in that top group. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. All right? Now, the Earth's crust, organic or inorganic? Inorganic. How do you know? I see no carbon. No carbon. Okay, in the Earth's crust. All right? So, proportion of elements in different living and non-living components. Questions on that? As I flip to the next slide and don't ask first. Okay, atoms and molecules. So the purpose of the next couple slides is to keep you straight on vocabulary. Bless you. So an atom is an element. So elements and atoms. Okay, so it's just one. It's an atom. All right? And it is okay in biology, we can interchange atom and element if we're talking singular. Now here's where we get a little fuzzy, and I'll continue to bring this to your attention so you can catch it and it doesn't trip you up in the future. But when we say molecule, we kind of throw it out there like molecule. But by definition, a molecule just means you have the same atoms together. It means you have the same atoms together. So if, for example, I had a hydrogen atom, that would be one hydrogen. But when I put two hydrogens together, I now have hydrogen gas. Because it's two of the same, it's a molecule. That molecule becomes a compound when I add a different atom. So if I have my hydrogen gas, my H2, and then I add an oxygen, which is a different atom, it now becomes a compound because it has different atoms. Okay, so a molecule is same atoms, multiples of same atoms. And a compound is multiple atoms. Like multiple different types of atoms, I need to say there. Different atoms. And I have the example that I used is right here. Hydrogen by itself is just H. Hydrogen gas is two H's, which is a molecule. That molecule becomes the compound when I toss an O on the back. H2O. So now I have hydrogens and oxygens. It is now a compound, by definition. Here is how we get tripped up. When we start talking, we'll say, we have one molecule of glucose. Technically, glucose is a compound. Okay? And so I'm not saying you need to change your language, but you do need to understand what the words actually mean. Okay? I'm not going to say, oh, you can't say we have one compound of glucose. You can say whatever you want. But I need you to understand what they actually mean. The difference between having just one, an atom or an element, then a molecule, which is the same group of the same atoms, and the compounds, which have different. Atomic structure. Right now, first of all, are atoms living or non-living? Non-living. The smallest unit of life is a cell. And we actually don't get into cells until chapter 4. So after chapter 2, which is chemistry, we'll do chapter 3, which is biochemistry, which is the chemicals that we find in life on all living things. And that's going to be our carbohydrates, our proteins, our lipids, and our nucleic acids. That's chapter 3. Then we'll get to chapter 4. So the next 2 chapters, we don't really discuss life. We discuss non-living aspects, but why are we covering this? This is biology. Because ultimately, when we get smaller than a cell, what makes up cells? Atoms, molecules, compounds, organelles, and then a cell. So I will teach you all of that as we go on. Okay? And that's why we're covering it. But the term I want to focus on here is nucleus, because we'll have the nucleus of an atom, but then we also have the nucleus of a cell. And so just making sure that when you're reading the question, you're in the correct context. The nucleus of an atom could potentially have both protons and neutrons. And I said potentially because some of them just have protons and no neutrons. Okay? So here is protons and neutrons, and this one just has protons. Protons and neutrons would only be located in the nucleus. Around the nucleus and the energy levels and within orbits, we will find your electrons. Okay? And so we're just going to do some basic proton, neutron, electron talk. For those of you who are okay with that, then this should be a breeze for you. So protons are positively charged. Neutrons are neutrally charged. I say it every time. I always say that. So I want to make sure I say neutrons are neutral. Neutrons are neutral. Protons are positively charged. Neutrons are neutral. And electrons are negatively charged. Okay? So protons positive, neutrons neutral, and electrons are negatively charged. I'm going to talk about what information you can get from the periodic table in a slide, but I do want to mention that the atomic number for any element will always tell you how many protons it has. If the number of protons changes, the element is different. Okay, and I'll explain and apply it. But the number of protons is always denoted by the atomic number. The atomic number changes, that element is different. So, this is this example straight out of your book. I think this is the one out of your book, or it's a better one than the one in your book. There's a lot that we can get from the periodic table, and I have it kind of noted, but I want to discuss. So this is what you would see on the periodic table, and why do you think I'm using carbon? All living things have carbon. And so a lot of the examples I use will be carbon-based because I know it applies to what we're going to do in this class. I'm not going to use something that we're not going to use, like gold. We aren't going to reference gold. Okay, unless you're made of gold, which you're not. So here's carbon. The number on top is the atomic number. Always the number on top is the atomic number. And some periodic tables are organized differently, but we're going to go with this basic design. Atomic number is always equal to the number of protons. Atomic number is always equal to the number of protons. The number of protons is equal to, does anybody else know? The number of electrons. Yes, I'm going to make a couple notes. So the atomic number is equal to the number of protons, and that number is equal to the number of electrons in a balanced atom. So in carbon, how many electrons do I have? 6. How many protons do I have? 6. Okay? And I can see that from there. Right beneath the atomic number is a letter. We call that the element symbol. The element symbol is based on what that element is referred to in a Latin language because Latin is universal. It just so happens that carbon in English and in its Latin version starts with a C. Do all elements, do their element symbols start with the first letters? No. One that we will use, bless you, is sodium. Sodium is Na. And a lot of people are like, but it is. It's just one of those things you have to memorize. Okay? So the element symbol is an abbreviation of that element's name in a Latin or a universal language. So in carbon, it's a C. Sometimes, many times, sometimes, the name of the element is actually beneath it as well. Okay? And that helps you if it's there. If it's not, then it doesn't help you. Beneath that, we have the atomic mass, also called the mass number. The atomic mass is equal to the number of protons. Bless you. Equal to the number of protons plus the number of neutrons. The number of protons plus the number of neutrons. And you always round the atomic mass when you go to calculating. So, and you're going to have an assignment not next week, but the week after that has to do with that. So in this case, my atomic mass is 12. Do you know how many protons I have? How do you know I have 6? The atomic number is 6, and it's equal to the number of protons. The atomic number is 6, and is equal to the number of protons. So I already know the number of protons is 6. So how many neutrons do I have? 6. Do you know how many electrons I have? 6, because the number of protons is always equal to the number of electrons. This is carbon. Carbon is an element that we will use a lot, okay? The simple calculations you will have to be able to do include using the atomic mass and atomic number to calculate the number of protons neutrons, and electrons. Let's do another one together. Oxygen. Oxygen looks like this. I don't know exactly what 16 it has here, but let's just say it's that. Okay? So, atomic mass of oxygen is 16. How many protons does oxygen have? 8. How do you know? It's the atomic number, that top number. So how many neutrons does it have? 8. And how many electrons? 8. We're not going to use any of the really big elements. We're not going to get crazy and, hey, so you're dealing with some synthetic element. I'm not going to do that to you. But you do need to be able to do 1 through 20, which gets us through calcium. Okay? So you do need to be able to manipulate those. Now, never mind. Here, I have everything that I wrote on the board typed out. I just wanted to walk you through my thought process and hopefully foster the development of yours. Okay, so everything is there. The atomic mass is the number of protons plus the number of neutrons. Using the information on a periodic table, the atomic number gives you the number of protons. We know that the number of protons is equal to the number of electrons. The atomic mass, I don't know why my voice is cracking, sorry. The atomic mass is the mass of protons plus the neutrons. And when you're calculating the number of neutrons, all you have to do is take the atomic mass and subtract the number of protons, and it gives you neutrons. Is there anyone who's confused here or needs clarification? Isotopes. By definition, an isotope just means it has a different number of neutrons. Isotopes have different numbers of neutrons. Isotopes. If I change the atomic number, the number on top, I literally change the element I'm working with. So when I went from 6 to 8, over in my example here, 6 was carbon, but when that atomic number changed to 8, it became oxygen. Okay? If that number on top changes, the number of protons changes, you're dealing with a different atom, different element. But sometimes you have a setup where you have a different number of neutrons. So in all of the examples I used, we had an equal number of neutrons. Sometimes you don't have an equal number and you have a different number, and we refer to that as an isotope. We use isotopes in biology, and so I want to kind of give you an example of what I'm talking about. So here were our perfect examples. Now, what we use isotopes for in biology are usually research-based. So here is carbon that you and I just dealt with. We call it carbon-12. Okay? Is this also carbon? It is because what? The same number on top. So this is carbon, but the mass has changed. So the number of protons hasn't changed, but what has changed? The number of neutrons. Remember, this number here is the number of protons plus the number of neutrons. That makes this an isotope. Is this still carbon? Yes. We call this carbon-14. How many extra neutrons are here? 2. This makes this radioactive. What do we use it for? We use it for carbon dating. We can tell, and that's actually the example that's used in the book, we can tell how old fossils are in the depth of rocks, how long they've been there. We can calculate that. We also use these types of isotopes as tracers. giving you an example. You go to a doctor because you and your spouse can't get pregnant. And you're trying to figure out what is it that we need to do, what's going on. Normally, they'll start you on different medications to try to increase your chances of becoming pregnant. And if that doesn't work, they're going to ask you to do an MRI. When you do an MRI, they're going to inject a dye in you, whether you're male or female. If you are either way, once they inject that dye, they're going to put you under that machine, and that dye will fluoresce. And everywhere that dye is, that machine will be able to see it. What they're looking for is where can that dye go? If you're a female and there's no blockage in your reproductive tract, that dye should go up through your uterus, your fallopian tubes, all the way to your ovaries. But if there's some type of blockage, what will we see happen? It'll stop. And that'll indicate, and there will no longer be a fluorescent, so that'll indicate to us something is there. If you are a male, that dye should follow from your testes, which is where you create sperm, up through your vas deferens or ductus deferens, which is the tube that carries the sperm from the testes out through the tip of the penis, and that only becomes semen on its way out. If that dye doesn't make its way out, we know that something is blocked. And men have 2 of those tubes, just like women have 2 fallopian tubes. So we use it for research. We use these radioisotopes for that. The crazy thing, though, is that they're radioactive, which means they can potentially induce mutations, which means they could cause cause a lot of different things, but we'll start with cancers. Okay, we'll start with cancers. So we do use radioactive isotopes. You do need to know what an isotope is. I did embed a video. It's on the old notes and the new notes, where you can kind of see not the research aspect, but what an isotope kind of looks like from a chemical perspective. But I wanted you to kind of put a handle on what we use isotopes for. Okay, so that just means they have a different number of neutrons. Here's where it talks about those radioisotopes in the actual notes. Any questions on this? Okay? So, electrons, we already know that the number of electrons is equal to the number of protons. Okay? So here, I have 1 proton. How many electrons do I have? 1. I have an atomic mass of 1, though. In hydrogen, I have 1 proton, 1 neutron, or 1 proton, 1 electron, because those 2 are equal. How many neutrons do I have? I have 0. None neutrons. Okay? So that's a thing. That's a thing where we don't have isotopes. We don't have neutrons there. So the number of electrons will always equal the number of neutrons. Does anyone know about the number of electrons, how we organize it? We're about to cover it. But does anybody know the rule? How many electrons? It's 2, 8. 8, 8, 8. So this first energy shell or level can accommodate 2 electrons. So this is called an energy shell or level, and I'm going to show you those terms in a minute. I defined them. But the electrons within that, this is considered an orbit. The next shell or level can accommodate 8 electrons in its orbit. And it can do 8 each one after that. So we start with 2 and then 8, 8, 8. You won't have to get much further because we're only going through 20 for biology. Okay? Energy shell versus electron orbit. These terms sometimes are used interchangeably. I'm not going to be upset if you call one or the other, but you do need to be able to identify it for your test. So I'm going to give you a moment, especially for those who are writing, and then I want to show you, again, the difference between an energy level or shell and an actual orbit. All right, so I'm going to go back to the previous slide because I like to use pictures. Each of these would be considered an energy shell or level. Okay, just referencing it. This is the first one, the second one, third one, fourth one. So, the orbit is this area within here where the electrons are actually spaced out. So, this is an energy level, and within it are the electrons in that orbit. Energy level, and these electrons are within that orbit. So that's how it's referencing it. The entire time I was in school, nobody distinguished between the two. They would call them orbits, and they would say valence electrons, and they would use all of those terms. And I just kind of caught on, but I still didn't understand the difference between a shell and an orbit. So the shell is just like where we're like, hey, this is that level or that shell. The orbit is when you're referencing within that how many electrons are there, that group. Okay? Just so you know. And I defined them using the terms on that next slide. Okay? Now, what holds these electrons in these orbits? The protons. When you have something that's negatively charged, what is it attracted to? Something positively charged. So you have one proton, one electron is attracted there, and it can hold that there. Because those opposites attract. Okay? Now, the distance between these electrons, is it random? No. Right here in this first orbit, I have one electron here and I have one on the complete and total other side. Why are they so far apart? It's they don't. What's the word? Not detract.
Repel.
Repel.
Okay.
It may have been right there the whole time. I don't know. Or it may have just accidentally pushed it up there. It's repel. The like charges repel. So like when you put two negative magnets together, they're like, oh, yeah, they push themselves apart. So these electrons truly do try to get as far away from each other as they can within their orbit. So again, an energy shell, within that orbit, these electrons are spacing themselves out as far as they can. Okay? We have this same issue here. These are evenly spaced from each other, pushing each other away as far as they possibly can at that point. Okay? So as far as the organization of neutrons and electrons and protons, the number of protons is always equal to the number of electrons. The protons balance or keep those electrons in those various levels within their orbit because positives and negatives are attracted to one another. Neutrons have no charge, so they have no say in that pool. But within each of the orbits, within that orbit, these electrons will repel each other because they're both negatively charged, so they'll try to get as far away from each other as possible. Proceed.
So why does the neutron reveal itself? Does it keep out in a sense between?
Are you saying in this case, why is the
Why
neutron?
will they appear the neutron?
How will they appear?
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Because they can change the way it reacts chemically. The neutrons control what it's capable of doing.
Okay.
So do but the protons, you change the protons, you change the whole atom.
So the neutron can go either way.
Can be manipulated to be less or more.
Okay.
Then when we talk about building compounds and molecules, we can also do the same with electrons. But you change the number of protons, you change the atom entirely. Good question. Very high level. All right. This is what we had said just a moment ago when I asked, does anyone know the rule for the number of electrons? The first level accommodates 2. Each consecutive level after will accommodate up to 8. We call it the octet rule. Okay, that's the name of the rule that says it goes 2 and then 8. All right, for each one after. This is all of that in writing. 2 on the first level, 8 in the second, third, fourth, fifth, but we won't go past the fourth. So, not in this class, at least. if the outer level is full, that atom is considered balanced or stable. And just like you, all atoms want to be balanced or stable. And some of you struggle on a daily basis to maintain your balance or stability. Or some of you are just happy in your chaotic disarray of unbalance. And you just accept it and you make it work. I respect it. When atoms are not balanced, they seek to be balanced. Okay? They want to be balanced. So in their quest to be balanced, if they don't have the correct number of electrons in their outer energy level, or within that orbit, they will tend to lose, gain, or even share electrons with other atoms. They're held together then by bonds, and we'll talk about the specific types of bonds on Tuesday when we come back. But those would be ionic and covalent bonds. Okay? In biology, just one more time, and I have it here in writing. It's now the third time that this is brought up. You just need to be familiar with the elements on the periodic table between hydrogen and calcium, so numbers 1 through 20. Okay, here are some examples of configurations of electrons. Here is carbon, the one that we will work with the most. I'm just going to say the most. When we build our molecules, you'll build molecules that have 32 carbons in them. Like this is, we're going to deal with a whole lot of carbon. I have 6 protons, so how many electrons do I have? 6. I have 2 in that first one, and then 4 in the next one. Is this balanced? Why is it not? The outer shell only has, and it needs 8. So carbon is a very versatile atom. Okay, so it can either get rid of 4 or it can bring on 4. And we'll talk about that as we get a little bit further. Oxygen has 8 protons, so how many electrons does it have? 8. 2 here. How many here? Balanced or not? Not. It needs 2 more. Okay, it needs 2 more. Phosphorus, 15 protons. So 2 here, 8 here, that's 10. How many on this one? 5. So it's still not balanced. Do you see and so they're so unbalanced, they're seeking for something. Hey, just help me see that. Be my life partner. All right. Here's calcium, and this is the biggest one that you will have to configure. And naturally, it's already here. So I want to make sure you have your resources. You have 20 protons. You start with 2 here, 8 here, which gets you to 10. How many can I get in this one? 8. So now I'm at 18. This last one will have 2. If calcium, for some reason, was to give its outside 2 electrons to another atom, would I keep this level here? No. If I give them away, I go down to the next level. Okay, and we'll practice that, but that's just something, it was easy for me to say there on calcium because it just had 2. All right? We'll learn how to manipulate that, but here's some examples of some electron configurations. Questions here? Okay? Here's another electron configuration chart. It looks very similar to the periodic table. All right? You could Google this if you wanted to. It will show up. But when you look at this, I am here for boron. Can anybody tell me what the atomic number for boron is based on this? How do you know it's 5? It has 5 electrons. Okay? Do you see how you can use stuff like this, and I could ask you about the atomic number, and if you know that the number of electrons is equal to the number of protons, and the number of protons is the atomic number, you're going to be okay. Remember, if we have a diagram in college, it's supposed to be there to help you. You have what you need. You just need to know how to interpret it. All right? This brings us into the molecular building, and I just wanted to touch on it because I wanted to introduce it. You and I, after we finish microscopes next week, we are going to build molecules / compounds. Okay? And some of them are going to be very simple, and some of them are going to be super complex. But what elements are we going to use the most? Chon. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. And then there's also phosphorus. Phosphorus is found in DNA. Okay? When we talk about biological molecules, it's found in a lot of other things as well, but it is found in proteins and DNA as well when we talk about biological molecules. None of them are balanced on their own, so they're always looking for something to create some type of balance. When we say a molecule, you need to be able to say a molecule is a group of the same atom. We defined that previously. But the topic I'm about to address is molecular formulas. Molecular formulas. This is not for one molecule. This is a molecular formula. So when I read it, it tells me how many of each atom are located in that, whatever it is that I have, a compound, or it could be a large molecule. So here, how many hydrogens do I have? I have 2 hydrogens. How many oxygens do I have? 1. So the molecular formula, by reading this, if I got ready to build this, which is what you'll be doing, I would look at that molecular formula and I would pull 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. And I would know that those are the atoms I need to build water. Yes. Okay? CH4 is methane. What do I need there? 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens. So that's just your way of interpreting what it is that you're going to need. Okay? We will use the molecular formulas to make the structural formulas. So I'm going to give you a kit that has these different colors that represent the different elements. And for example, using water, H2O, I'll have 2 hydrogens and 1 water. So this is water. This is the structural rendition for water, H2O. I have just 1 bar here, so that indicates that both of those are single bonds. And I'll teach you how to read all that. But we'll take molecular formulas and we'll use them to build 3-dimensional models, structural formulas. Okay? This is just me showing you examples, and you will build all of these. But here's methane. Methane is CH4. You will have this set up where you'll have the carbon, and you'll have the 4 hydrogens, and then you will build it like this. We do not have space-filling models, but I use this diagram because some schools do use space-filling models. We use ball sticks so you can see the individual bonds. You will build ammonia, NH3, so you have 1 nitrogen and 3 hydrogens. So you're just taking the molecular formula and turning it into something physical. Okay? I have a lot of students who kind of get upset with this or get panicked or worried. They're like, what if I don't know what order they go in or where they need to go? So first of all, I'm not asking you to recreate molecules that we've already had forever. Like we've had water forever, right? We have references and you'll have diagrams to go off of. And if you are still completely stumped and we've looked at your book and you've looked at your lab manual, who can we ask? We could ask Google. Because these aren't anything that haven't been around forever. I'm not asking you to create anything new or big. Okay? But we'll get there. I just wanted to kind of introduce that to you so that you would see where we're going. This is where I'm going to end Chapter 2 today, and we will start with the chemical reaction aspect on Tuesday. Any questions?